it's kind of like a stick and carrot approach. You know, you're trying to win hearts and minds. You're trying to actually, the dream ticket is the council, because actually the council is us. They're supposed to be our representatives. So if they're a self-sustaining bureaucracy that are following their own sets of rules, then they're clearly not doing their job right. And we're always, in everything that we do, we're always told no to begin with. So where that cube was on the roundabout, they said you couldn't possibly put that cube up there because it's got this much dirt on it, and if you scrape the dirt off it, you might damage the roof. And so we just did it. And so we just dug it all off, got a van, took 4 tons of earth away, and then retrospectively went and said, look, we've done it, it's better. And then they actually felt embarrassed and gave us the money back. So they, you know, actually, I think you don't want to be playing their game. You know, one of my least favourite words is allowed. If the sentence has got, are you allowed, I don't actually want to play. You know, because actually it's our fucking streets, you know? It's our space. And what we've seen, you know, if you think of it in a historical context, what we have seen is the greatest diminution of the commons everywhere. And what happens in microcosm in your own little area is exactly the same issues that confront indigenous tribes in the Amazon. It's exactly the same thing. It's having some control over your own destiny. It's having some say, and actually the way you do that, and something Marcus said to me yesterday when he said, am I coming? Because I don't ask my emails and all that sort of stuff. He said, it was really interesting, that thing about, you were saying about if you sweep the street, you really notice when somebody else has put a piece of litter down. And if you swept your own street, then you certainly have a very different attitude to it. And you know, if you look at it in a philosophical way, there's a philosopher who comes from Somerset, actually, called John Locke. He was quite big in the 1600s. He had a concept of property. This notion of property is absolutely central to everything that we're talking about. And it's all made up. It's a whole made up thing. So he evolved this concept of property that if you do work on the land or on the space you have, then it becomes in some way yours. And that was an extremely useful idea when you're an empire and you're invading in indigenous lands of North America, because you dig the ground and you put up a fence and then it's yours. And you completely ignore well, it wasn't a property system, the system of how it works for tribal culture. So, I'm sorry, I may have rounded off the subject a little, but...
Lucinda, can you respond?
But it is the subject, it actually is the subject. So, in short, don't indulge them too much with their fucking bureaucracy.
However you prefer. Yeah. Charlie, if you want to.
It's kind of like the same question for 3.
Charlie. I don't really know. For us, in the beginning, it was also very hard to push a small project forward. So I don't think that for us, scaling the projects up makes the thing more difficult. It makes the thing more difficult maybe in economic terms, which is not a minor question, but not in bureaucracy, because now with the pass of the years and city start knowing us and knowing what we are doing, so with this knowledge and this confidence somehow, we don't need to explain over and over again what we want to do. Okay, we have to do it and we have to go to meeting after meeting, but it's not as hard as it used to be in the beginning, where it was completely prohibited and they didn't know really what we were talking about.
Yeah, I think it's true, of course, and it gets more complex. But I think also there's a kind of perception inside the city councils that the persons who already know what's going on, they make it easier. And you know, they get involved and so on. And this is kind of dangerous at the same time, because as the experience of Toronto, you need to be somehow impartial. Because if this mayor is from left wing and it goes away, it gets next mayor and everything gets like political, you know. And this is truly apolitical in the sense that it's a political, religious, you know, it's a question of property. I think it's in human nature. You know, I know very good writers that are like from the right and from the left and from the top and from the down. You know, so and I think the bureaucratic things, in some sense, are good because it makes this neutral thing. But in the other sense, they tend to complexify and tend to difficult the life of small structures and so on. So I think, like the people who are here, who are driven to be talking these kind of sessions and stuff, they are the talkers, you know. Because when I was a doer, I was not in these sessions. I was in other places, you know. So I think we all share this thing. So bureaucracy can be good and bad. I don't know, but generically it's bad.
Can you hear me? Okay. With regard to Basquiat, I'm not an expert on graffiti art. I'm an expert on fine art more, if I'm an expert at all, and I would doubt that because I don't, there's a lot to learn. But I know about the New York art scene of the late 70s and 80s because I'm researching Jean-Michel Basquiat, and that was racialised. Now, I would just suggest that there are people here who know a lot more about graffiti in its wider sense than I do, but just as graffiti in itself is ephemeral and is diverse, from tags to conceptual pieces, poetic pieces, highly stylised, illustrative pieces. So I think that the motivation and the context of graffiti is different. Sometimes it's political, sometimes it's racialised, sometimes it's not. And so I just think that you can't say is graffiti as a whole or is graffiti in contemporary society racialised. It depends who the writer is, and there's a lot of variance. I just know from my research that the New York scene graffiti was racialised at that time, and that the racist implications around the reception of that had an adverse effect on Basquiat's art.
Fine art and graffiti. I actually tend to think, I think it's a much more useful way to think of all these things as a spectrum. Because there are some pieces of work that I see in the street that I would clearly say have all the values of fine art, and most of the graffiti writers I know are currently trying to be scaling their work down onto canvas so they can sell it.
I agree.
Yeah. So I don't actually see that there's a fine art, I think, it's like a false split, graffiti, street art, all these labels. I think the actual labels are constricting in many ways.
But I think this is something that we've discussed over the
sorry.
past few days.
Yeah,
we all agree that we don't really like these labels for what we're actually talking about. Can I get some questions?
So one of the issues that's sort of raised is that street art started as black art, and that actually the street artists who are successful are white. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I can't use this one because I don't know how to put it on. Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think street art in America started as black art. And thinking about street art in Spain, for instance, so in Barcelona, street art was prevalent during the time of the Civil War. So again, I don't think you can use blanket terms to describe street art. It's so global and it's so diverse. But I do think that there is an element in American and British street art where we are seeing the way that it impeded Basquiat's career. But you look at some commercial street artists, such as Banksy, you know, and also it was interesting during the New York art period of the 80s, when dealers and gallery owners colonised street art. Most of the black street artists had very short-lived careers in galleries. But yet people who were very tenuously linked to street art, like Keith Haring, for instance, rose to huge commercial success. A really interesting street artist who kind of breaks this assumption, and this is why I don't think you can make assumptions, is a fantastic street artist called Lee Quinones, who was part of the Wild Style graffiti scene, and who did find success as a formal artist, but retained his work as a street artist, and actually is still very successful in both worlds to this day. But I think he's a good example of somebody who really worked in both genres, and actually you could say, and I agree with this point, there shouldn't be boundaries. Basquiat's work just raises the questions and opens the discourse, I would suggest.
Okay, we've got 3 questions.
Yeah, so Lucinda, I think might have a comment on the question. Obviously you mentioned Lee there. Would you say that it was
Sorry.
oh, can you hear me? Sorry, yeah, it's more questions comment. Obviously just to mention Lee Anonymous, would you say that without what his name was, Henry Chalfont, without his input,
Yeah.
do you think he would have had that, the opportunity that he would have had to come and to be taken serious as an artist? Also with Basquiat and maybe other writers in New York during the 70s and the 80s. I can't remember her name now, but she was a journalist and she was
Yes.
a Wild Style film as well. And, well, there was a character based on her in the Wild Style film. You know, without her input, middle class, white woman,
Yeah.
do you think that some of these artists would have had the opportunities that they ended up having in the end? Some of the black writers, the Hispanic writers in New York, without the input of people like Chalfont and also, I can't remember her name, also people like Martha Cooper as well. Do you think that without their input, they
I
would
think
have had
probably. I mean, who can? It's hard to say in retrospect, but one suspects maybe not, because Chalfont's Wild Style movie really promoted Lee Quinones and also Fred Braithwaite, Fab Five Freddy, Lady Pink as well. So. And interestingly, these are the artists who, you know, if you Google them today, they've got websites and they are still working and making a living out of this with quite considerable success. And all those countless other street artists who are not lucky enough to be picked up by that film vanished into obscurity. So I think probably that film did play a huge part in Lee Quinones' success. And also in relation to Basquiat, the organising of the New Wave, New Art Project and the Times Square show, and also the pop artist Maripol, who made the movie Downtown 81, that featured Basquiat in a loosely autobiographical role as a young painter, carting his canvases around and spraying his same-o messages to try and attract the attention of Andy Warhol and co. All of this helped his career. So I think, you know, those opportunities helped the early success and levitated street artists to the attention of that very cliquey New York art scene of the 80s. It was just that when Basquiat tried to become taken seriously as a serious artist, it was then you know he met just barrier after barrier, and towards the end of his 10-year career, talked about the weight of this constant burden of representation, having to stand up for a group, having to stand up and be counted, and rather than just being himself and being able to develop, or what he did develop as an artist, having his development recognised.
Thanks. I just would like to come back quickly on a racial point. I would say I really appreciate the point that doing graffiti or painting in the streets is first of all something human. It's like a human art, and it's not in doing, it might be not racialized, but surely the reaction that we live is racialized, and there might be other categories like class, gender, that we have to, like I can say, painting in different places. Normally I can trust on police or anybody else coming and like arguing. I'm a white male European and I trust in that, and normally I don't get in bad trouble. It's like that. And another point where it surely is racialized and class dependent is when we want to put it into art and in institutionalized art. And this is where I would like to come back to the other presentation where the point was the power of art. I see, and that makes me really angry at some point, that the power of art, first of all, is exercised by art being an extremely excluding practice. So that is why I argued yesterday also that it might be useful to not even call it art. Or if we call it art, then let's try to make it an art that is not exclusionary or maybe inclusionary by assimilating, but inclusionary across and through difference. Because that is the point that I see, and the important point that I see in street art, that it might be something like that, because it's not that much institutionalized until now, but we are working on it, right? Like being here. So let's just consider that in our call to action. Right? Yeah.
Can you pass it to Rachel?
We're going straight in. Yeah. Okay. Thanks everyone for your talks. It was kind of a question and another point. So I'll start with Basquiat and Lucinda. I really enjoyed the way you were picking apart some of the pieces. It was really fascinating. I'm not at all an expert on Basquiat. But there were a couple of points I was confused with in the argument. So, if I'm correct, his father was an ambassador. Is that right?
An accountant.
An accountant. Okay, then that argument goes out the window. Unlike Cost, though, and here's my little punchline little one. Unlike Cost, he was fucking Madonna. Anyone? Someone? Okay, there was an in graffiti joke. But also hanging out with Warhol, also being art from and documenter. So, I mean, in my imaginary version with Basquiat, he's a high art figure. So I didn't understand quite the argument there in terms of if he's at documenter and hanging out with Warhol and being an artist. I didn't quite understand what you were saying, which I'd just like clarification.
I'm not sure. I don't understand the question.
Okay, then I didn't quite understand the argument you were making about him not being successful or not being accepted whilst also being accepted.
Okay.
Shall I come back to the second part after?
Can I respond to that part first?
Yeah, please.
So yes, my argument was that Basquiat achieved short-lived fame. That fame was a bit more like the fame one might ascribe to a rock star. So, yes, he worked collaboratively with Andy Warhol. Now, actually, that was mutually supportive. Andy Warhol's career was on a downward slide at this point. Working as he did with Basquiat and Clemente actually raised his profile. It was mutually beneficial. and thinking about Basquiat's private life, his relationships and so on, I think that that's a really good example. That has been focused upon by the popular press much more so than by scholars. And when we think of artists, what really serious artists deserve is serious scholarship around their work. So Basquiat's body of work deserves serious scholarship. And we could, you know, if you think about the scholarship on, say, Picasso, we could talk about his relationships. If we think about Sheila, we could talk about his, we could talk about his sexual activities and so on, but we don't. We talk about the art. And so the fact that Basquiat was a black artist trying to make his name in an overwhelmingly white art world, and also the lingering effect of his relationship with graffiti, which was very tenuous at best, has really captured him forever in the public mind as some kind of pop persona. And I would argue that he deserves more scholarship. In fact, that's the purpose of my research. And actually, you know, it's very rare that Basquiat's work is credited by being shown in museums or public galleries. But if anybody is in Toronto between February and May, the Art Gallery Ontario, in pursuit of this very cause, are holding a huge retrospective, over 100 paintings. So I think, you know, that exhibition is called Now the Time, and I think now is the time to start seeing Basquiat more as a serious artist. So yes, he had a short-lived, you know, kind of moment in the spotlight, but my argument is that his work is worthy of serious scholarship.
That's really interesting. I would totally agree. I think it's maybe in the graffiti street art imaginary, he is, you know, a fine artist. So yes, maybe in the academic and the popular imagination. So thank you. The other thing, sorry, quickly, was just more of a point from Pedro's talk, which I really enjoyed. It was two images you displayed, which I think perfectly encapsulated a lot of the things we've been talking about the last couple of days, which was the Oceanios blue and then the Brad Downey. If you could get it up again, that would be great. The Brad Downey image, I think, is an amazingly powerful image. I think it's called Buff the Fox. Is it called Buff the Fox?
Yes.
So it's he's playing on Fuck the Buff. So rather than in the image, he buffs over every single piece of space which isn't graffiti. So the pavestones, the hoardings, the building, the glass, everything. And that is such a fascinating comment and a critical comment on the state of graffiti and street art and the state of public space. So left is beforehand, right is afterwards. So he's buffed the pavement, he's buffed the glass, he's buffed the building, he's buffed everything but the graffiti from the 70s during the dictatorship to the more contemporary graffiti.
Raphael, you maybe ought to explain Fuck the Buff and why that's the fuck.
That's a graffiti reference?
I know, but
Okay, so as that's a classic graffiti phrase reference, should I go into that more? I don't want to get it wrong, so I think I'm going to get it wrong. So I'd rather get something else.
New York City, you know, once they started buffing the train cars, then Fuck the Buff became the counter. That right up there. Ah, there you go.
Okay, so as a classic graffiti phrase, Fuck the Buff, as in everything is getting buffed. And this is getting the other way around, so rather than Fuck the Buff, buff the bucks. So he's just flipping the whole argument on his head. And I think that's such like using the term agonistic, critical expression about street art and graffiti today. But let's take it back to images, got Oceanios and blue. That's again an amazing image, which is inviting people in. So these are two different ways that we can use public space, image making. That's kind of, I think that just encapsulates a lot of the arguments we've been having over the last couple of days. So it's just a comment, really.
Yeah.
A long one, sorry.
Thank you. Maybe I can catch some of the human stuff that we were talking about and try to make some kind of intervention here. But actually, this is not, now it's not there. The guys, from the authorities, when they seen this, they didn't understood, as you can imagine. So they just, I don't know, they didn't. They thought it was a foolish thing to do because it was something that was on construction. You can see and the guys from the construction company, yeah, it should be really crazy stuff to see, but it's not documented actually. But well, this was on this idea of this construction of this creative city, running of a city, and trying to put it on the context of a city council promoted event, And it's this contradictorial thing that's quite interesting with this subject. Regarding the art thing in Basquiat and the art world and so on, I feel very difficult to work with this art and artists and these kind of designations. I tend most of the times to say author and not artist because the connotations of this, it's not because I feel that it's precisely because I feel that everything is art, and every second and every object and every millimeter of the existence, it's a miracle, It's so relevant as any other thing. And this is not my idea, there's some art trend that comes from, the beginning of the previous century that talks about this. So, and I try a lot to get out of this art thing and put in the author thing, and more about human behavior and so on. That's why, and I think all these authors, all this structure that we are talking about goes a lot around this. It's more art, it's more activism or art, but in the end we are all, authors of things. When you put art label, you are pushing into the art market and to the art logic, with the academics doing their work in some way. So it's good from one side, and it's, can be, it's a dead end, in fact.
It's a fact.
Yeah, it's a fact, but for this kind of impulse, this human expectation that comes from, that drives from this, the art world, it's a dead end.
I agree with what you were saying, even though a fact of life is there is art and there is other, and it's this broad label of what is other. And there were two things that hit me, and one of them was Keith Haring really was a community artist, and his major work was featuring AIDS and HIV, and he was making a statement that then people collected. So whether he was artist or community graffiti or whatever you want to call it. And the other one is that Michael Craig Martin, anti-graffiti, last night was being praised as godfather of the YBA. And the idea of the Chapman brothers buying Goya, defacing, and it's called art. So I just wonder how you feel about that.
Well, I find that confusing, but those quotes are genuine quotes. Just as Norman Mailer's very racist quotes were in a book that was intended to celebrate New York graffiti. I find both comments by both of those authors, critics, writers, artists, in the context they were being made, really racist. But I wonder whether they were aware that they were.
But isn't it back to capitalism and labelling of categories, of hierarchies?
Yes.
Going back to what you're saying. It's a hierarchy. This is good taste, this isn't. This is a right to put in the gallery, this isn't.
Yes.
And it's what we're seeing is your movement between gallery, external space, and robbing space, and making good things within it, or bad things.
Yes. It's who makes those decisions and who makes that distinction.
Just very
Or
brief.
this is so
As we
interesting.
saw,
Just,
the-
just a very
sorry.
brief try to put the contribution. Yesterday, I was trying to do it previous time, but I was not able to. I really need to do like a table that has like time and place and space, you know, because these two things are essential, you know, for this subject that we are dealing with, and mainly because you know, this time thing, if you go to the caves and not the 70s, it's a totally another subject that touches humanity and not just Occidental world, you know. And if you go in terms of place, it withdraws totally the objects and the thing of the art in galleries and so on. It deals with the city and the territory and, you know, spatial things. So I see a lot of things from this perspective of the place and not so much of the form or the content. I try to defend myself like this because if I enter in the contents and the narratives of the content of the elements that are put in the bathrooms or in everywhere, I go crazy. You know? It's like, because it's so much. You know? So I try to focus on the place only and then the time frame.